after they brought us here from Africa and we worked in the fields and in the house, it was the food that we cooked for ourselves from the leftovers of animals and plants to keep our body and soul together. That's where the term soul food came to be.
So, I mean, what's your background in soul food? And just for the readers, the listeners, what's your background? What area of the country are you from? And what was your experience like there?
I'm from Florida in the South, and I grew up eating soul food. My great-great-grandmother, great-grandmother, and grandmother all cooked soul food and cooked it basically in the same way. And it involves a lot of slow cooking of foods because we were out in the fields working, so we had to put foods on the cook that would cook all day long and slowly and tenderize the tough cuts of meat that they did give us when we had meat.
So is this food healthy?
It's not necessarily healthy, but there are healthy ways to cook it. You know, we've grown over the years to the point we know that, you know, you shouldn't use so much pork fat, use more olive oils and, you know, not so much hydrogenated oils. Yeah, there's healthy ways to cook it now.
Okay.
We have choices now. We didn't have choices before.
Any examples?
Well, you know, one of the most basic soul foods is collard greens, and we all learn to cook collard greens by putting a bunch of ham hocks or ham ends in a pot and to season the greens up and washing them and putting them in there with these seasonings and bacon grease. But now, you know, you can kind of saute them with garlic and some olive oil and use a little smoked turkey instead. You know, we've just found healthier ways to prepare the same foods.
Let's take it back a little bit, talk about your background. Did you know any slaves?
Did I know any slaves? I'm sure I did when I was a child. My great-great-grandmother, but she never really clearly defined herself as a slave. I do know that she worked in the house and she was the laundress. She did the laundry. So yeah, you can say I did, but when you're a child, you know, you don't really identify that so quickly as an important part of your family.
So many of the recipes we're talking about, did it come from her?
Yes, handed down through generations. Because if you go to many African American families, you'll find that on down the line, not so much today, people cook things pretty much the same way their mother taught them, and they hand it down to them, and they hand it down to them.
So, was there any indication of what we ate prior to becoming slaves?
No, you can research the history now. You know, now that they have Ancestry.com and all these other websites, you can find out the regions of Africa you genetically came from, and you can look up some of the foods in that area. And what's interesting, it kind of correlates with some of the things that might have been specialties in your family, you know, the way you make sweet potatoes or the way you cook the greens or, you know, the way you cook various things.
So some of the food that the so-called master handed down to the slave in slavery, are these like any remnants of Africa, some of this food?
Oh yes, because Europeans went everywhere, you know, and bought plants and not only bought people, they bought plants and trees. And Christopher,
I got it on.
So yeah, you know, like peanuts and, like I said, peanuts and yams and those sort of things, you know, they weren't native to the Americas.
So that's pretty interesting. I mean, to be able to reach back and talk to somebody that has some sort of experience. How about A little bit off topic, since you're from that area, there was a lot of civil rights activity when you were growing up. There wasn't too much.
Yeah, there was a whole lot in the 60s and beyond. There were marches in my town and marchings in surrounding areas. There were people killed. There were young people coming down from the north to participate in the marches. You know, there was a lot of activity going on. Everybody was aware of it. You know, some people were afraid of it. Some people, you know, just embraced it. And, hey, you know, we need to have better conditions.
So, are you familiar with the Rosewood story?
Yes, most people from that era are familiar with, I hate to put it this way, it's like the keynotes of the movement for equality. Most people, and you know, it was taught in the schools because we had segregated schools. So our black history was probably vastly different from what they teach in schools today. You know, they emphasize those things that were happening then at the moment.
So you remember the segregation. You remember having to use separate bathrooms and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I can remember going on long trips, and we as kids couldn't understand why when we had to go to the bathroom, we couldn't stop anywhere. You know, there were particular places, especially traveling from upstate New York where my grandmother lived to Florida. There were only particular places you could stop along the way to get something to eat. And go to the bathroom. And you know, even as a child, I felt the wrongness in that. You know, you see everybody else going to the bathroom. We had to pack big lunches because there weren't that many places. We'd have to go to places. You had to know the black communities in just about every state. So if you had trouble with your car, you need to go to the bathroom, you needed to eat, you needed to spend the night. You had to basically set up an above ground railroad for travel, and you didn't travel at night if you were black.
Why is that?
Because people disappeared. You know, darkness gives people opportunities sometimes to do things they won't do in the light. So when I was a kid, we didn't travel during the night. You know, as soon as it turned dark, we found somewhere to stay, or we went to the next cousin's house or the next black hotel or the next, you know, safe little black community where we could just spend the night and take off in the morning.
Okay, so you're from Florida and New York. So when you take that trip up and down the coast, what are some of the communities you used to stay in? Oh, it's hard. We would stay in various places. Usually we would leave upstate New York. We'd stop in North Carolina. You know, then we stopped somewhere in South Carolina to eat. I mean, there was a whole string of places that you knew that you could stop in on the way down and go to the bathroom. And, you know, usually you had to get off the highway. Didn't exist the way it did now. You had to get off. But you didn't want to veer off into little country roads where you didn't know people. But for the most part, we had relatives all up and down what's now is, what is that? That reaches, is that, like we have I-5 on this coast, is 95 on that coast. Yeah, we had relatives that live up and down off 95, so we would stop periodically. Interesting. So how about during that time, other ethnic minorities like Hispanics? I know you're part Hispanic, but any experiences with Hispanics and what they were going through at that time?
Basically the same thing we were. There weren't that many Hispanics or Latinos when I was a little girl. You know, we spent most of our time actually around Native Americans. In upstate New York, it was mostly African Americans, Native Americans working in the fields and the canneries. So we spent quite a bit of time up there around Native Americans. And when the migrant workers were mostly black back then, and some Native Americans and a handful of Mexicans. Not as many as eventually immigrated to the States now, but back then you would run into an occasional Mexican person.
Yeah, I remember you telling me a story about the band that would come and play, but they would have to come stay. Where would they stay, and why did they have to do that?
Well, when the band would come play for barbecues in the summer, they had to stay with each of us in
mariachi band.
Yeah, they had to stay with each of us in the community. You know, there wasn't a white hotel that was going to let them stay there. They would come and they would play for the weekend, and, you know, the word would go out that they needed a place for a band member to sleep, and people would volunteer their homes.
So we're talking in the 50s, 1950s, 60s.
Talking about mainly in the 60s. I don't remember much for the 50s because I was born at the end of the 50s, so I don't remember too much then. But yeah, and the Black Baseball League would come through and play games, and the players would stay with people in their homes.
So they just wouldn't, staying home, kind of like a Chitlin circuit type of.
Yeah.
Kind of reminiscent of that movie. Was that Halle Berry movie, Lackawanna Blues?
Yeah, sort of like that.
Pretty much like the same sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And we always had someone staying at our house because my grandmother owned a juke joint, what they call a juke joint then. It was basically a club where you danced and drank and gambled. Christopher.
That was her grandson. Grandkids around grandma, that sort of deal. That's pretty interesting. What about the juke joint? I mean, is it kind of like, you seen that movie Outkast put out? What's that movie Outkast put out?
We're talking about...
right after they had the big album.
Oh. Yeah, it was sort of like that. She had a juke joint that she ran. Yeah, she had a juke joint that she opened on Friday nights and closed on Sunday.
Idlewild, that's what it is.
Yeah, it was sort of like that.
So we got a lot of stuff for our sound clash. You know how I like to do it. I like to dub it with the movies, so we probably gonna do that. We're gonna roll into that now.
Lord have mercy.
Hey, Harpo.
Oh, Lord.
What you doing here?
I come here to hear Miss Shug sing and to see what a nice place you built.
Just a scandalous. One with chilling in a juke joint. Had night.
Woman need to have a little fun, Harpo.
Woman need to be at home.
Hey, I don't fight my woman's battle. My job is to love her and take her where she want to go. Ain't that right, baby?
That sure is, Buster. Sure is, right, honey? You got it.
Yeah.
Let's dance.
Yeah, woman.
First time I ever been knocked down without throwing a punch.
Rich dog.
Politibro. Tell him, man. And if you don't know, now you know. Politibro. And if you don't know, now you know. Politibro. Check it out. If you don't know, now you know. Politibro. And if you don't know, why you know? Politibro. And if you don't know, now you know. It's Politibro. And if you don't know, now you know. Politibro. Now you know, now you know, now you know, now you know. It's Politibro. All's well, things well. What the sound am I doing? All right now. What you guys sounding well? There's too many things happening in the world today. Need discussing. Yeah. That mic there. Get it. Rich world. Get it. Well, oh man, now, come on. Stop playing around. Hit it. Just one time.